This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Nigel Farage.
The Royal Air Force Regiment has announced it's opening up combat roles to women in a move that will be extended to all branches of the military, despite concerns of some senior officers. Now, Defence Secretary Michael Fallon has said that a diverse military would be more effective. But there are figures such as Colonel Richard Kemp, former commander of British forces in Afghanistan, who said he vehemently disagrees with allowing women to serve in the infantry. It's a contentious, long-debated issue. Do you think a ban on women in combat is out of date? Are you concerned? Does it worry you? Well, later on in the show, we'll be talking about David Davis's visit to the States today, where he's talking about trade, he's talking about Brexit and a future US-UK relationship and how long that might take. But we'll also crucially be talking about North Korea. And joining us at 5:30 today, we will have former US Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. And at 6, we will talk about why so few young British people and graduates now want to become school teachers. What is it that's become so unfashionable about teaching? But for now, yes, it is the military. It is women in the front line. And let me say to begin with that when I went on the 6th of June to the beaches of Normandy for LBC and produced a show about the sort of last remnants of that generation who go back to those beaches and to Normandy every year, I made an absolute specific point of interviewing as many women as I could that were there. And I said, do you feel in many ways that the role of women was underplayed in World War II? And sure, you know, I met women who'd been out on the Thames estuary on the Ack batteries and doing all sorts of things. And yeah, a few of them said sometimes we do feel our contribution has been underplayed because they were flying Spitfires around the country and doing all sorts of things. And of course, we bear in mind that in Russia in World War II, you know, there were women driving tanks, flying fighter planes, and all of that. So I think it's important we recognise, you know, armies like the Israelis have had women in the front line for some time. It's important we recognise this, but do we really want women in frontline roles, ready, prepared for hand-to-hand combat, perhaps, you know, fighting with bayonets, knives, or whatever else it may be? Now, this is something that David Cameron really wanted to push very, very hard. And indeed, you know, one of his last acts as Prime Minister was to lift the ban on women serving in close combat units. The current Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon, feels very strongly about it. He says a diverse force is a more operationally effective force. I find that a really fairly extraordinary comment. I would have thought the point about any combat force is that it acts together as one, which doesn't mean that different sexes can't work together. But the concept, because it's diverse, it should be better, I find rather odd. Now, there are some people who are really speaking out very strongly against this. And Colonel Richard Kemp, former commander of British forces in Afghanistan, is really very strong about this. He says, once you have to get through selection, you are subjecting yourselves to a minimum of 4 years of intensive physical training, day in and day out, in barracks and out of barracks, which puts a huge strain on a man's body. He says, the reality is that during these periods, women suffer far more injuries than men, which will undoubtedly see a very significant compensation payment culture having to be made out of the defence budget. So is Richard Kemp, Colonel Blimp, is he out of date? Is he spouting a doctrine that our grandparents might have believed to be right, that has no place in the modern world? Or are there genuine concerns about women serving in hand-to-hand fighting roles, whether they're moral concerns or whether they're concerns about size and strength? And I'm particularly keen to hear from women on this debate. You know, how do you feel? You know, would you want your daughter to be a frontline, hand-to-hand combat fighter, yes or no? As ever, the number to call is 0345 60 60 973. You can text me your views to 84850. You can email nigel@lbc.co.uk. You can tweet at LBC, and provided it's clean, I promise I will read it out. And Aaron from Bromley is my first caller. Aaron, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well. Are you a former forces person, Aaron?
I used to be a police officer, Nigel, ex-police officer myself. So
right.
I'd just like to say that I am against. I'm actually for women to join the army across the forces, because I believe that they're in very, as well as men now, Nigel. They're in very, very powerful roles as well as men. They've got a lot of. I feel their approach as well would be a very important thing within the army roles as well, because sometimes women do take a slightly different approach to how men would, I'd feel.
But Aaron, surely, officers, decision makers can take different approaches and think about things and do things in different ways. But the very last thing you would want in a unit is for individuals to take different approaches. Surely the only way that an operational force is effective on the ground is it has to act as a body of one.
No, I do agree. I do agree with you there. I just feel that sometimes it is good to take a fresh approach on certain scenarios and situations. I feel personally, from experiences that we've had in my role as an ex-police officer, we've had general scenarios where one or two males would say a certain scenario in relation to a certain, it could be anything, whether he was doing a particular operation, and sometimes we'd sit in a briefing room and have a couple of other females in the room with us, giving us their views, and sometimes we've taken not just our own approach, but we've obviously listened to them and take on board their approach as well.
Yeah, well, that's
very, very effective.
In terms of strategic discussions, I get that. But Aaron, tell me something. Is it likely that two women police officers would be as effective in dealing with a mass brawl outside a pub at closing time as two male police officers?
I believe in some cases they can be. I believe that... In
some cases? Not in all cases?
Yeah. I believe that their approach is, from my perspective and my role as an ex-police officer, I feel that they're very, very good at dealing with situations by talking to people as well, whereas males can be, but I feel females are very good in dealing with, which I found are very good in dealing with very, very conflict scenarios, really.
So you've got two drunken gangs outside a pub at 11 o'clock, punching hell out of each other. Surely rational debate isn't necessarily what's very useful in that situation.
No, I totally agree. I'm just sort of, from my experience, Nigel, working within the Met, we've had scenarios where we've worked in, together, female and males, have been in a specific situation, i.e., like you said, a mass brawl, and we've sort of had a mixture of male and females, and it has been very, very effective working together.
All right, Aaron. No, listen, I'm hearing you from your experience, and I'm expressing scepticism because I can't believe that your average female frontline police officer, just like your average female frontline soldier, is going to be as physically strong and capable as a man in what is a pretty brutal situation. Yeah.
No, I do agree with you in that sense, Nigel. It's just a case of, I feel, working together. And like you said, there are females out there that can match men physically, really.
There are some, yeah. Yeah. No, Aaron, I think there are some. All I would say about this decision for the RAF regiment, known as the Rock Apes, for reasons that I don't know, but somebody please tell me, all I would say is they can go ahead and do this, provided there is no lowering of physical standards in terms of what people can carry, how fast they can run, etc., etc. Aaron, thank you for your call, and thanks for your experience. And Aaron there making the point that actually having women part of a team policing on the front line can be very useful, because often they have a different point of view. It's a good point. I wonder what Josie in Camberley thinks. Josie, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. I'd like to say that 30 years ago, I was in Israel. Women had to be in the army, and they did as good as any man can do, and I don't see why any woman in this country can't do the same.
Well, are women going to be as strong as men, Josie?
Physically, maybe not, but there's a place for everybody.
I couldn't agree more, Josie, which is why I'm questioning the role, in general, of women on the front line, because we all have...
If I had to shoot somebody, because they were going to perhaps kill my family, I would do it.
Yes, but what if, Josie, what if you had to deal with two 6'5" thugs? Is it like...
Well, that's the same if I was a 5-foot man? What's the difference?
Well, the difference I'm arguing, and please tell me I'm wrong, everybody, is that the average man is stronger than the average woman.
But a 5-foot man isn't. If you get a 5-foot
and a 5-foot man, but a 5-foot man wouldn't qualify for a frontline British Army regiment. He wouldn't be let in.
Now I get it down to semantics. A woman can do every job that a man can do.
Right, so women are as strong as men, yeah?
They can be, yes, definitely they can be. And if it came push to shove, I guess any woman to protect their family or their country.
Well, I'm leaping, Josie, on your former point, that we've all got different abilities, and what I'm arguing is that when it comes to sheer, brutal force of strength...
Well, how many times do we have brutal force these days?
Well, there was plenty of hand-to-hand fighting in Afghanistan, and it's very interesting. It's very interesting, actually.
Were there women in the army in Afghanistan?
There were women in the army in Afghanistan, but they were not in frontline combat roles.
And so, there's a place for everybody in the army.
Yes, I agree with you, Josie. I'm not disagreeing with you on that.
Well, why are you talking about hand to hand?
Because specifically, what we're talking about here today is the RAF regiment. Okay.
The RAF now. Sorry, I didn't realise you were talking about the RAF.
Let me explain what we're talking about here. The news story is it's the RAF regiment that are today opening up and asking women to apply for frontline roles. The RAF regiment are the ground bit of the RAF. They are the people that defend the bases, etc., etc. They're the people that have to deal with intruders or potential terrorist attacks or whatever it may be. And I don't disagree, Josie, with you for 1 minute that women are very capable of playing all sorts of roles in the military. The only thing I am saying is you want your strongest, toughest, fastest running people to be involved in a role that can involve hand-to-hand combat.
With the right training, any woman can do that.
OK, Josie from Camberley thinks any woman can match a man physically with the right training. She may be right. I'm sceptical. You're listening to Nigel Farage here on LBC, standing in for Ian Dale. It's 4:15. The RAF regiment are, from today, going to be recruiting women into front-line roles that could include hand-to-hand combat. There are some, like our Defence Secretary, and indeed our former Prime Minister David Cameron, who think it's fabulous. The Defence Secretary says a diverse force is a more operationally effective force. There are others, such as the former commander of British forces in Afghanistan, like Colonel Richard Kemp, who think it's a very bad idea. He worries that women will suffer more accidents in training and that this will lead to greater compensation claims against the army and money out of the defence budget. Do you think that it's a completely outdated view to say women should not be involved in frontline hand-to-hand combat? Or do you have concerns about the issue? And I have concerns because I've not yet been convinced. I'm being told by people that have been calling in that with the right degree of training, women can be equally effective in hand-to-hand fighting as men. Yes, there are some women who can, of course. I just would not want to see this lead to any lowering of standards. Michael says to me by text, diversity has become a dogma of almost religious proportions. The only consideration must be operational effectiveness. Well, please write to the Defence Secretary. Get him to explain it to you. Hi, Nigel. I'm ex-army, and I served in the Falklands. The last thing a fighting soldier needs is women to worry about. And you would worry. It's nature, says Gary. So Gary feels if there are women in those situations, he would worry about their well-being. Well, Gary, I don't know. We already have women serving in artillery and in armour and in all sorts of other parts of our armed services. Terry from Gainsborough, what's your view?
My view is that your view is, and everybody else is totally wrong, that all women are just people that sit at home worrying about broken fingernails.
Who said that?
Well, your perception of a woman fighting on the front line. Now, my daughter...
Hang on, Terry. I don't actually think that is an accurate or fair reflection on anything that I've said in the last 20 minutes or any caller or texter or tweeter has said.
No, but I'm just doing the concept of a woman fighting. My daughter, I'll cite in my daughter.
Yeah.
Was in the army for many years. She fought in Kosovo. She was there at Iraq at the beginning. And I can tell you that there ain't many blokes that would tackle her, and she had massive respect. And
what was her job in the army, Terry?
Sorry? She was a recovery mechanic.
OK, fine.
And there isn't many women doing that, I can assure you.
No, and you're obviously very proud of what she's done, and
I'm very proud of what she does, but I can tell you now, I mean, when I have two sons of a very similar age to her, and when they used to go out, I didn't mind going out as long as she was with them.
But maybe, Terry, maybe your two
women like her.
Maybe your two sons wouldn't have qualified to be frontline, hand-to-hand combat infantry soldiers. I mean, come on, Terry. Terry, what I'm saying is this. You know, I said at the top of the hour here that when I went to Normandy this year, I did my best to interview every woman I could find, you know, who played a role in that Normandy campaign, because I wanted to get across to LBC listeners the fact that it wasn't just about men. Women were doing all sorts of extraordinary things as well. And I think in many ways, what the armed forces have done is to use women's abilities along with men's in all sorts of extraordinary ways. And, you know, we had a former police officer, Terry, earlier on saying, actually, when you're sitting down discussing an operation, a female view can be useful because it is perhaps a different perspective. I buy in to all of that. What I am saying, Terry, is whilst there are some women who may be equally physically as strong as men, in most cases, Terry, they're not. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but in most cases, in a lot of cases, a lot of blokes that aren't physically strong.
Which is why they're not. Which is why, Terry, they're not front. But Terry, that's why they're not in the infantry. That's why they're not given a bayonet.
The women are the same. The women are the same. If they're not suitable, they won't get there.
Right. Do you think? And we've talked a little bit here about diversity. Michael Fallon has talked about diversity. Do you think it would be a good thing for our frontline infantry fighting regiments to be diverse in terms of male and female, even if that led to a lowering of standards?
It won't lead to a lowering of standards because the person that was on the lady that's on the front line would be selected as suitable for that job.
Right.
You can't go saying that women. Them days are gone when you can't say women can't do jobs. You're saying it's serious bother.
Well, all I'm saying, Terry, is if they're going to have women in the front line of the RAF regiment, would you agree with me that they would have to pass exactly the same physical standards as men?
Yes, that's what I've just said to you.
Fine, OK.
They meet the grade. You can't discriminate.
So everybody must be treated exactly the same, and if they make the same
opportunity.
Fine, Terry.
If they're weaker, they can't do it.
If I believed this would not lead to a lowering of standards, I might be arguing a little bit less against it. I'm just not quite convinced. But Terry, listen, you make your point very powerfully, and clearly Terry there from Gainsborough in Lincolnshire, incredibly proud of the role that his daughter played in Kosovo, Iraq and elsewhere. John from Morden, good afternoon.
Hello, Nigel.
Hi, what's your view?
I'm currently serving.
Yes.
And I've served in some of the worst places in the world with and without females.
Okay.
What I'd like to say, first of all, is that the ex-police officer that called up at the start is absolutely correct.
Mm-hmm.
Females do often bring a different approach to situations that men won't necessarily have. Yep. And in that manner, they can be indispensable.
Mm-hmm.
However, under fire, in the brutal, visceral, horrifying nature of combat that still is, because combat isn't drones, as you're led to believe in the media. Combat is men fixing steel and getting stuck into the enemy.
And it's still like that, John, isn't it?
It's still like that absolutely everywhere. And the media will have you think it's long-range weapons and drones, but it's not.
Yeah.
And every single time I've been in that situation with females, the females have been quietly sent to the rear.
Through their own choice, or because the operational commander thought that was the most effective thing to do?
Because they were paralysed with fear, because they were wetting themselves, because they were screaming for their mothers.
John, I've not served in a situation like that, but that is your real feeling from active combat experience, is it?
I've seen it firsthand numerous times, and there'll be women all over the country right now screaming at their radio sets that you can't judge women by 3 or 4 that you've seen. It's not 3 or 4. It's getting into the triple figures. And diversity is something that is rammed down the military's throat at the end of the government's hand, and it's going to cost lives. Women make an absolutely vital addition to defence.
Yep.
But on the front line, in the vast majority of cases, is just not the place. And there are certain physiological facts of this world that can't be changed under the banner of diversity.
So, John, you feel that women don't make good killers?
Women make fantastic medics. Women make fantastic thinkers. Women make fantastic suppliers. But when it comes to fixing bayonets and taking a life, it has never worked, in my experience, ever.
John, thank you for that very powerful, emotional testimony. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard John's view. I'm sure some of you will find it difficult to believe. Some of you perhaps will be very angry about it. I'd like to hear from women who perhaps agree with John that maybe women too aren't suited for frontline combat roles. Strong opinion from John, and one that I have to say took me back a little bit. I was a little bit surprised to think that all the women that he served with, faced with that hand-to-hand situation, hadn't been able to cope with it. We have to take people at their word. This has been a burning, contentious issue in the British military for many, many years, and I do repeat the point that I think that more women coming into the military, a different perspective, their expertise in all sorts of areas has been a great benefit to all of our forces. I still remain sceptical that it's right to put women there, absolutely, on the front line for hand-to-hand combat. But you know what? I'm here to be convinced by you. Let me know what you think by calling 0345 60 60 973. I'm Nigel Farage, standing in for Ian Dale. The Royal Air Force Regiment is recruiting for women to serve in the front line in hand-to-hand combat roles. And I'm asking, are you in favour of women taking on combat roles in the Army? And I'm particularly keen to hear from women on this, ex-servicemen or women on this, any of you really that have a view. It seems to me to be one of those issues on which virtually everybody has a very strong opinion, and we've certainly heard some of those in the course of the last half an hour. I'm going to ask Jane in Surrey what she thinks. Hello, good afternoon.
Hi there, Nigel. I just listening to like a couple of these people and hearing their opinion. Women have been on the front line for ages, and people think, and I still speak to people now and say, yeah, I've served on the front line in Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever, and they said, I didn't realise women were on the front line. And okay, fine, it's not specifically a frontline role, but you're still expected to do a frontline job. You know, you're still carrying, as a medic, which is what my job was.
Yes.
You're still expected to do a frontline role, maybe not in the same capacity as what, the lads are expected to do. But for me, I just find it amazing that people can be so narrow-minded as to think, well, if something happens to somebody, how are they getting treated? Because if a chap can't do the job.
Jane, I mean, from what I've heard and people I've spoken to that have been serving as medics in the recent conflicts, they're very much in the front line, and in fact it's because of that that so many severely wounded soldiers don't die, are saved, so I understand that, but I was trying very hard not to define this as frontline. I was trying hard to define this as frontline combat troops who would be engaged in hand-to-hand fighting. That was the difference, Jane. That was the distinction I was trying to draw.
I mean, you could say that, but then at the same time, you're still expected to be a soldier first. So I understand that perhaps as a medic, you might not be seen as frontline soldiers, but you're still expected to do a fighting role if needs be, because there might be an incident where like 2 or 3 people might be injured and you're still expected to step up. You've done the same training as what they've done. You still have to carry the same, okay, maybe not the same amount, but an equivalent amount of kit as, the chaps do. You're still expected to do a similar role, and it really, it might not get as publicised as what this has, and the press have obviously pushed this because it is big news.
Oh, yeah.
It's been going on for ages, and people just think that it hasn't, and it has.
Well, I understand your point, Jane, that if you're there in the front line as a medic and there's an emergency, a disaster, you have to do whatever you can do, and I can obviously understand that. I think the question is, should we be specifically putting women into roles where we know they will be engaged in hand-to-hand fighting?
A woman can still do the job of of what what any lad can do. You know, I don't think. I think emotionally, perhaps they might be wired slightly differently, but I think men and women, it just depends on the experience you've had. And if you're trained to look at a certain situation and see that, and your training instantly kicks in, then that's the way that you do it.
Okay, and how did you find, Jane, the testimony that we had before the break of a guy who said he was still a serving soldier, that he'd been in some pretty bloody horrible situations, and that the women just had not wanted to engage with that?
I think that goes for different women. You know, that I've met women in my careers who have put themselves in situations where perhaps they suddenly realise, this isn't what I want to do, and this isn't where I want to be. So actually, you know, I'm going to quickly back out of this the best way I know how. But it's the same way. It's the same for men. You know, I've met men who have suddenly realised, oh gosh, I don't want to do this anymore, and who have broken down and
I'm sure,
possibly refuse to.
Yeah.
You know, it just depends on the certain individual. And I think.
Did you believe his testimony?
I didn't hear it, in all honesty. I caught the end of it.
He was talking, in pretty explicit, graphic terms about women facing a hand-to-hand situation and basically turning and running and just not wanting to engage with it.
I've only come across one individual who has basically done that. But then at the same time, I've worked with the infantry, and I've done training exercises with a couple of infantry battalions, and then they've turned around and, you know, I've opened on a training exercise, I've opened the back door to a vehicle where we're setting up scenarios of injured individuals, and they've run a mile. So, you know, and I've opened the back door and said, right, treat these casualties, what are you going to do? And they can't cope, and they're sick and all the rest of it.
But that equally, but that can happen to women or men, of course, and I understand that. I understand that too, of course I do. So, Jane, overall, on reflection, you know, and you've been there, seen it, done it. On reflection, are the RAF regiment right to now be recruiting for women to join their frontline fighting force? Do you have any qualms about it at all?
The RAF are a completely different kettle of fish to the British Army. I believe that the RAF, their physical standards are lower than the rest of the Navy. I just think the RAF are completely separate from the British Army, and the British Army are sort of in a league of their own in physical robustness. I believe that if you're going to open it up to anybody, it should be the RAF, because it's just not. I don't believe that it's as physically demanding.
Well, there's a bit of inter-forces rivalry there, I sense, Jane. But listen,
call me biased.
I think you're very biased, but I thank you for the sterling work you've done on behalf of our country. It's a very, very, very brave thing that medics do. It really is, Jane. Thank you. I get a tweet from Lisa. She says, I completely agree with John, and I'm a strong, independently minded woman. Diversity has a place, but not on the front line. Facts over feelings. Chris says, I do not have a strong opinion about this, but I would trust the experienced opinion of a man such as Colonel Kemp over that of a politician any day, says Chris. I wonder what Jacob from Birmingham thinks. Jacob, hello.
Hi, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm well. Are you relaxed about this, Jacob?
I am, yeah. I'm really positive, I think. We keep telling women that they can't do jobs, and they're not going to ever grow into being that person in the fighting role, or for whatever it is in any industry. My background is I joined up in the Royal Engineers in 2000. There you couldn't have ladies or women working alongside the men because apparently the bridge parts were too heavy and couldn't do the job.
Yep.
2003, 2004, they were allowed. They've done the job fine. There was no problems at all. And
standards didn't lower, Jacob?
No, not at all. If anything, as I say, you get a better perception from women as well, and men.
Okay.
Once you've got them both working together, then it moves forward really good.
All right, so we should just get on with it, modernise, it'll all be okay, Jacob, yeah?
Well, yeah, and then you can't keep telling people that they can't do a certain job because of the way they're born. You need to be able to, case by case, Never ever drop the standards.
Fine, that's the key point. Yeah, that's the key point. Jacob, thank you. Now, Everton striker Wayne Rooney, who has been charged with drink driving, we've just learnt from Cheshire Police. Let's get more on this from Anna Hodges, LBC reporter in Liverpool. Anna, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yes, well, the reports started coming in this morning that Wayne Rooney had been pulled over for drink driving, but it is just this afternoon that Cheshire Police have confirmed that the 31-year-old had been pulled over in the early hours of this morning on suspicion of being over the legal limit for alcohol. Now, what we know is that he was stopped in a black VW Beetle. He was driving along Altrincham Road in Wilmslow, which isn't very far from his home in Prestbury. Well, Wayne Rooney had only just rejoined as an Everton player, and he has now been charged, but there hasn't been any official word from the club yet. Now, the former England captain is not involved in tonight's World Cup qualifier with Malta. That's because last month he was dropped from the starting lineup, so decided to retire from international football. He has now been released on bail, though, and he'll appear before magistrates in Stockport on the 18th of this month.
Excellent. Anna, thank you very much indeed for that. And I have to say, folks, if I was earning the money that Wayne Rooney is earning, and I was going out for a late-night curry or a few drinks, I think I could probably afford a taxi. But there we are. Not good news for Wayne Rooney. So listen, we're getting some very powerful opinions on whether women should serve in the front line. Some saying these same arguments were used about women in other branches of the forces. They've proved their ability, provided it doesn't meet with a lowering of standards, it's okay. And you know what? I can't fight against that. I'm just sceptical about how many women actually will meet the same physical standards as men. I could be wrong. There are many of you out there who think often that I am. Now we have entered the era of gender non-specificity. Is this actually a valid conversation to be having? Maybe there should just be a rigorous minimum requirement that must be attained and no need for gender to be an issue at all, says Tim in Cardiff. Well, in a sense, Tim, with all the other debates about gender that have been going on, there is indeed a certain logic to what you have to say. I'm Nigel Farage, standing in for Ian Dale. It's 4:45. Women on the front line. No, women in combat roles, hand-to-hand combat roles. Women have been on the front line for many, many years. And indeed, as I pointed out at the top of the hour, and many of you by text are pointing out, Mike from Finchley repeats the point. Women have been serving in frontline roles in the Israeli army for over 30 years. I can't see this as an issue for our women. And Mike, I don't think this is an issue about the front line. We had a call before the break from a medic, and she made the point. She's very much in the front lines as a medic. The question I'm really asking is, does it make sense to advertise for women to do hand-to-hand, frontline combat infantry roles, and can you do that without a lowering of standards? Many strong opinions. Paul from Romford, what's your view?
How you doing, Nigel?
Fine, thank you.
Yes, I think I'm up for it anyway, because you cannot make it through phase 1 training if you cannot hack it, basically.
Yep.
It's coming from an ex-military point of view. I've served with women. They're perfectly capable of handling themselves. We've been in some hairy situations in Helmand Province, but without them, we wouldn't have made it out.
So what unit, Paul, were you serving in?
I was with the Fusiliers.
Fusiliers, right. And how close to I mean, women were there in the front line with you, were they?
They weren't necessarily in a combat role, but they were the engineers and the medics. So we had an ambush, basically, but they stood their ground. They did not cower crying for mummy or anything. They stood their ground. Most of the blokes were doing that.
Right.
But they didn't. So they're perfectly capable of handling themselves.
Okay,
with the right training.
So you've seen women in highly stressful, dangerous environments, and they behaved extremely well. Yeah,
they handle themselves with the perfect training. The British Army standard training is top notch. So if they can do it, they can do it.
Yeah, Paul, I understand that totally. Yeah. But I just want to ask this one last little question. The women that you serve with, how many of them would have made, good hand-to-hand combat fighting soldiers?
Of all of the ones I served with, I would say all of them.
Would you really?
Yes.
So you think
capable of doing it?
You think they would have attained the levels of strength and everything necessary to do it?
Yes, with the right training, you can achieve anything.
Interesting. Paul from Romford, ex-army, Royal Fusilier, making the point that the training in the British Army is so good that if you've got the right people, male or female, they can not just hack it, they can crack it. Interesting. Scott from Portsmouth, hello.
Oh, hi there, Nigel.
Hello there. So what's your view, Scott?
I'm a first-time caller. I'd never normally call in because I don't feel like I'm qualified to pass comment on such things, but I am actually an ex-army officer in the infantry.
Well, then you're very highly qualified. You're very highly qualified to comment on this. So what?
I think.
Go on.
I think lots of people have made different points, and maybe points I'm already going to make. I'm going to make now, but what it comes down to for me is a matter of principle and practicality. And in principle, I can't see why anyone would be able to say that women can't serve in the infantry, providing they can go through the same training, phase 1, phase 2, pass the fitness test, pass the skills test, pass everything. So they can get to that last day of training on the combat infantryman's course. No one not suitable for the infantry, because by the sheer fact that they've passed that course, the British Army is rubber stamping them and saying that anyone is suitable to serve in the infantry. That's what the point of the training is.
Yep.
But where the argument comes down to, I think, is the practicality. I agree with the Colonel with what he says about his issues with injuries, and I've seen it both firsthand, and there is evidence that I've seen that shows that women are more susceptible to injuries when training in a military environment. And there is a massive problem in the Army, across the Army, not just in the infantry, but especially the infantry, with soldiers being injured, medically downgraded and medically discharged. So I think that is definitely something that needs to be looked at. Yeah. And that's an area of practicality.
Well, Richard Kemp certainly has expressed that view. Scott has expressed that view very strongly. And Scott, can I just ask you, I mean, you've been there as an infantry officer, just ask you how you feel about the Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon, saying that a diverse force is a more operationally effective force.
I completely... I agree that a more diverse force would be more effective, absolutely. I think women add a great deal to the Army already, and for me it becomes a matter of principle to say that women can't serve in the infantry, provided that they can pass the test, as I said.
Yeah.
No one has the right to say that. No one has the right to say that. So we should open these roles up as a matter of principle. If they can pass it, great, and if they can stay fit and they can, and a few years down the line, once it's been open, women have proved that they can keep themselves fit and keep themselves injury-free and combat effective, no one has the right to say that they can't do that role.
OK. Scott from Portsmouth, you made your point. First-time caller, welcome. Thank you for giving us your experience and your point of view. Victoria in Suffolk, I understand you're serving in the military, is that right?
Hi there, Nigel. Yes, I'm currently serving in the military myself. Have been in for a number of years now, and been to different theatres and different jobs.
Yep.
Now, in some cases I've served ahead of where the infantry have been. They've been behind me, and there's never been a particular problem where the guys will say, no, she can't do the job, you need to send her back. I think it's down to the character of the woman and whether she's got that steel character to actually go ahead and do the job and not just get into it in the thick of things, really. But what's more important is that it's not sold to women wrongly. You need to know what you're actually getting into, what the job actually entails, and not the fantasy that can be sold to you, that is the infantry.
OK, so are we talking here about strength and those sort of physical characteristics?
It's a number of things. Now, I don't think the standards should be dropped at all. I think the women should be able to get to the same sort of standards as men to do that job. Otherwise, it's not going to really work, to be honest, because that role does require someone who's strong, who's fit, who's got the endurance, and you're going to do some long hours. You're going to be away from home or on exercise for like weeks on end. You need someone who's robust enough to cope with that. And when it comes down to strength itself, now I've on one of my tours, I've had to carry an extreme amount of weight, the same as the guys, and sometimes they'd even throw more at me just because I was a female on the team and they wanted to test me out to see if I'd break. And you had some of the infanteers go, well, she can't carry that. That's the heaviest bag. The guy should be carrying that. And my boss would turn around and say, no, why? She's got to do the same sort of standards as us. Why can't she carry it too? And I think some men try to wrap the women up in cotton wool and think, oh, they can't do that. But they can if you've got the right woman in the job.
OK, so you're serving, you're pretty confident, provided selection is done correctly and standards are maintained, there is really, frankly, no problem with this at all, yeah?
I don't think so, no. Just so long as you sell it to people correctly and don't sugarcoat it, just make sure they know what they're actually getting into. Because otherwise what you'll end up doing is women joining up into this job and then realising, oh, it's not what was sold to me, and it'll be one of those things that probably end up failing. But you just need to say, right, this is what you're going to do. This is it straight. These are the standards. You must meet these.
Yep.
And it should hopefully work if you're just honest with people.
OK, Victoria, thank you very much, and thank you to all our callers and our texters and our tweeters. It's a subject that excites enormous passions. I have to say, provided we don't see a lowering of standards in any way at all, and provided one or two reservations we've heard from callers and Colonel Richard Kemp about women and injuries prove, let's hope, not to be the case, that maybe in 5 or 10 years' time, this will be one of those issues that is a non-debate. I just worry when I hear the Defence Secretary say that diversity in a frontline unit is a good thing of itself, whether we might not finish with a lowering of standards. Let's hope I'm wrong. Now, David Davis, who was busy in Brussels yesterday, has been off to the British Chambers of Commerce in the USA today. He's given a major speech. He said we must not turn our backs on globalisation, and in many ways, it looks like he's had a bit of a go at Donald Trump, because Trump is pretty sceptical, certainly about trade with China, and Davis was being very positive about China and about free trade. And to my surprise, he was also sceptical about how soon a UK-USA trade deal could be put together. How important is Britain's relationship with the US in the future, especially after Brexit? Give me a call on 0345 6060 973. This is Nigel Farage, standing in for Ian Dale.